Okay, welcome to lesson 40. So this is a review lesson, and crucially, this is a very important review because we're going to be looking back from lesson 21 all the way through to lesson 39. My name's Stephanie. This is level B2 or upper intermediate, and this session forms lesson 40 of the complete course. Let's have a look at what we're going to cover. So, as I've just said, in lesson 40, we are going to review lessons 21 through to 39. So what I've done for each slide, I have put a number that refers back to the previous lesson. So, for example, if it's number 22, that refers to lesson 22. So that's a very easy way for you to see if you're finding something difficult, you know exactly which lesson to go back and have a look at. We are also going to practice the key topics. So as well as reviewing, we will do this through practicing the key topics that we've looked at, and we are going to focus on can-do statements. So if you have studied all the lessons up to this point, there's an awful lot that you can do now. And I think it's really important that we take a moment and look at the things that you can do in English. So every fifth lesson, we will have a can-do focus. So there's lots to do today. As I said, the slides are numbered, so it should make referring back very easy. Let's get started. So way back in lesson 21, our topic was future perfect. To start with, true or false, we use future perfect to explain that something will be finished, to make predictions about the future, to explain a time frame or result. What do you think? Are these true or false if we think about the future perfect tense? Are these sentences correct or incorrect? Call me after 7 p.m. We will eat dinner then. House prices will have rise by next year. By the end of this month, I have lived here for 6 years. Pause the slide and see if you can answer these questions. So the first three I'm asking, are they true or false? And then have a look at these sentences. Do you think these are correct or incorrect? Pause the slide and then we'll check our answers together. Okay, ready? Let's have a look at the answers then. So the first three are all true. These are all valid reasons why we need to use the future perfect tense. However, if you notice, I have corrected the three sentences. I've added in the missing words and underlined them. So the first one, call me after 7 p.m. We will have eaten dinner then. Number 2 was house prices will have risen by next year. And the third one, by the end of the month, I will have lived here for 6 years. So remember that when we form a future perfect tense, it's will plus have plus the past participle. Well done if you got that right. Remember, this is a review lesson, so we're just practicing, we're reviewing. If you want to understand why and how, you need to go back to the original lesson. Okay, let's move on. Lesson 22, we were having a look at expressions with take. There are 6 sentences, and for each one I've given you 2 options. Number 1, the laptop doesn't work properly. I'll have to take it back or take it off. Number 2, the crash took place at a busy junction on the motorway. Number 3, If you take up or take off your jacket, I will hang it up for you. Number 4, she took up or took part dance classes as a form of exercise. Number 5, I think I take care or take after my dad. We have the same eyes and smile. Number 6, please could everyone take part or take account in the survey. So pause the slide and choose which is the correct word for each sentence. Okay, well, you had a 50-50 chance with each of those because there were only 2 options, but hopefully you've chosen the right ones. Let's have a look together. So, number 1, the laptop doesn't work properly. I'll have to take it back. I'll have to return it. The crash occurred at a busy junction on the motorway. If you take off your jacket, I will hang it up for you. She took up dance classes as a form of exercise. I think I take after my dad. We have the same eyes and smile. Please could everyone take part in the survey? Again, remember, if you want to do this in more detail, you need to go back to lesson 22, where we looked at a lot more expressions as well. I've just chosen a few for the review lesson. Okay, lesson 23 was our second lessons on the future perfect tense. So, if you remember, we've just looked at how to form the future perfect. Now we're looking at future perfect continuous. So remember, the continuous form is expressing duration. There are 6 sentences there. I've given you the verb in brackets. So number 1 is wait. Number 2, make. Number 3, live. Number 4, study. Number 5, travel. And number 6, work. But for each sentence, I'd like you to form a future perfect continuous sentence. Pause the slide and write down your answers. Okay, well done if you've managed to get those written down. We will check our answers in a moment. Remember, at the time we talked about the fact that it's a nice, easy tense to form. The important thing is to know when to use it. And to understand that in more detail, you need to go back and look at the lesson. But let's check our answers. So number 1, in 10 minutes, I will have been waiting for 2 hours. Number 2, she needs a break. At 5 p.m, she will have been making cakes all day. In 2020, they will have been living here for 10 years. Number 4, in August, I will have been studying French for a year. Number 5, they will be tired because they will have been travelling all day. And number 6, be careful here because this was a negative. Will and not makes won't. Unfortunately, you won't have been working here long enough to be eligible for promotion. So if you manage to get number 6 right and you correctly put it in a negative future perfect continuous, that is excellent and you should feel very pleased with yourself. If you didn't, don't worry, it was a little challenge there at the end. Okay, let's move on to lesson 24, where we talked about bring, expressions using bring. Okay, so again, I've got 6 sentences. For each one, you have 2 options. So number 1, I was brought up or brought around by my grandmother. Number 2, the departure has been brought ahead or brought forward due to bad weather. Number 3, Nike are planning to bring out or bring in a super lightweight trainer. Number 4, the government promised to bring back or bring down taxes. Number 5, the invitation stated guests could bring with or bring along their children. And number 6, fortunately, the intervention brought peace or brought action to the region. So again, pause the slide and see if you can identify the correct word to go with bring. Okay, time to check our answers. Number 1, I was brought up, I was raised by my grandmother. Number 2, the departure has been brought forward due to bad weather, so it will happen at an earlier time. Nike are planning to bring out, to introduce to the market, a super lightweight trainer. Number 4, I think we should all guess this one. The government promised to bring down taxes, to reduce taxes. Number 5, the invitation stated guests could bring along their children. The children could accompany their parents. And number 6, fortunately, the intervention brought peace to the region. So again, this is just a snapshot of the expressions that we looked at in Lesson 24. If you haven't studied Lesson 24 yet and you'd like to expand your knowledge with expressions with bring, then by all means have a look back at that lesson. So then we reached Lesson 25. So this is a good moment to look at what we can do. So by Lesson 25, you can form the future perfect simple, form the future perfect continuous, and understand what these tenses mean and when to use them. You can also use phrasal verbs and expressions with take, and phrasal verbs and expressions with bring. So we did a lot in that first 5 lessons of this part of the course. So well done if you've studied 21, 22, and 23 and 24. Okay, we then moved on to Lesson 26, where we had another grammar focus. This time we were talking about past modals. Let's have a look at this slide together. So I'm asking you to choose from would, could, should, might, and may. I've made the tenses for you, so for each one is have and a past participle, but the key thing which we talked about here was how the modal can change the meaning. So for example, which modal are we going to use to express regret, which to express possibility, which to express certainty, and which to express that combination of possibility and ability. So if we have a look at the 5 sentences, I've given you the feeling of the sentence. So for number 1, I want you to express regret. I'm tired. I have gone to bed earlier. Number 2, possibility. It have been better to leave earlier. Number 3, she wasn't the right choice. I have done better. This time, certainty. Number 4, watch out. You have crashed. This time I want you to express possibility and ability. And number 5, if I had practiced more, I have won the match. This time, possibility. So you'll see that 2 and 5 are both possibility because there are 2 modals there that express this. Pause the slide and write down your answers. Okay, let's have a look together. So number 1, I should have gone to bed earlier. Should for regret. And we talked a lot about how this tense is very useful when we use past modals to look back at something, to reflect, and often you'll do this with regret. I should have gone to bed earlier. Number 2, might or may. It might have been better to leave earlier. It may have been better. They both express possibility. Number 3, for certainty you need would. She wasn't the right choice. I would have done better. Number 4, if you want to express possibility with a sense of ability, watch out, you could have crashed. Number 5 was the second possibility sentence. I may or I might, depending which way round what you used in number 2, I may have won the match. So I think this is a very key grammatical topic for this level because it's using the language to explain subtleties. So, for example, you're expressing regret or you're expressing certainty, and it's very important at this level to be able to do that, to understand as well when you're listening to people. If I say, I would have won the match, I may have won the match, I could have won the match, what's the difference? So, a very key topic for this level. Okay, let's move on. Lesson 27, we looked at verbs of the senses and we talked about stative and active verbs. Have a look at this list. Do you know which of these verbs are stative and which are active? Pause the slide and see if you can identify them. Okay. So I've highlighted in green the stative verbs and in blue the active verbs. So drink, run, buy, write and speak are active. All of the others are stative. Now, do you remember or do you know why it's important? If you've watched this lesson, you'll know. If you haven't, maybe you can have a guess at why it's important to know the difference between stative and active verbs. Well, as I've written underneath, we do not normally use stative verbs in a continuous tense. So the verbs in green, we do not normally use in the ing form. We don't say, I am understanding you, or I am knowing how to speak English. So that's one of the reasons why it's very important to know the difference between a stative and an active verb. Well done if you got that right. Okay, moving on to past modals again. This time in lesson 28, we looked at must and can't. There are 6 sentences, and I'm asking you to choose either must or can't to complete the gaps. Number 1, well done. You have studied really hard to get such a good result. Number 2, you be tired. You slept for 10 hours last night. Number 3, you have been tired. You slept for 10 hours last night. Number 4, you have forgotten already. I only told you 5 minutes ago. Number 5, £10 for 2 coffees. You be joking. And number 6, I don't believe you. It be true. Pause the slide and choose either must or can't to complete the sentences. Okay, let's have a look at the answers. So number 1, you must have studied really hard. Number 2, you can't be tired. You slept for 10 hours last night. Number 3, you must have been tired. You slept for 10 hours last night. Number 4, you can't have forgotten already. Number 5, you must be joking. And number 6, it can't be true. So do you remember, when do we use must and when do we use can't? Have a look at the examples. Well, must is if you believe something is logically true. So for example, number 1, somebody has an X excellent result, you believe they must have studied really hard, logically. Can't if you believe something is logically impossible. For example, somebody who has slept for 10 hours, now they can't possibly be tired. So it's using the information that you have and making an assumption, whether it's logically true or logically impossible. Okay, the second of our vocabulary lessons in this block was connected to the body. Do you remember? We talked about elbow, jaw, thigh, lungs, chin, heel, spine, armpit, kidney, wrist, ankle, and cheek. Okay, I'm asking you now, where are these located on your body? 12 body parts, but where are they on your body? A clue, they might not all be outside. Maybe some of them are inside. Bit of a clue there. What I'd like you to do is to pause the slide, please, and see if you can identify where you think these are on or in your body. Okay, hopefully you know some of those. There may be some new ones. If you've watched the lesson, hopefully you'll know all of them, but let's check together. Okay, so I've put the body part or the area on the left. So leg, connected to your leg, we've got thigh, which is the top part, heel and ankle, which is the lower part. So heel on your foot and ankle is joining your leg to your foot. It's the joint there. On your face, you have your chin, your cheek, and your jaw. Internal, we have spine, your backbone, kidney, and lungs. And connected to arm, we have the wrist, this part here, the armpit, which is underneath here, and your elbow. So any of those that you're not sure about, have a look maybe online. If you have a look at an image, it will show you exactly where, especially with the internal ones. It's very difficult for me to show you where they are. So if you're unsure, have a look on the internet. Okay, so by this point, let's look at what we have achieved. Okay, so by lesson 30, you can use could, would, may, might, and should to form the modal perfect and understand its meaning and use. You can use the verbs feel, hear, see, smell, and taste to talk about impressions. You can understand the difference between stative and dynamic or active verbs. You can use verb and adjective or verb and like and noun constructions. You can correctly use must and can't for logical deduction. You can identify parts of the body. We had a pronunciation focus, so you are better able to pronounce words with silent letters. And we also looked at some idiomatic expressions with body parts. So that was a very interesting part of the lesson 29. So well done if you've studied up to that point. That's a really long list of things that you can now do. Lesson 31 was another grammar topic, and this time we looked at the gerund and infinitive. But do you remember which verbs are followed by the gerund and which are followed by the infinitive? So to practice, I've given you 6 sentences. I've given you the verb. You just need to decide, is it ing or infinitive? The guidebook suggested to visit or visiting the old part of the city. The PR team postponed to release or releasing the bad news. I'm sorry, but I can't afford to spend or spending any more money at the moment. You should avoid to walk, or you should avoid walking alone after dark. She seems to be worried about something, or she seems worrying about something. And number 6, I expect to receive, or I expect receiving an answer by the end of the week. Pause the slide and choose which one you think is correct. Okay, the nice thing with these verbs is that you just have to remember them, and then there's no grey area. Certain verbs are followed by the gerund, and certain verbs are followed by the infinitive. Let's check the answers. So number 1, after suggest, you need a gerund. Suggested visiting. The same with postpone. Postponed releasing. After afford, you need an infinitive. I can't afford to spend. After avoid, you need a gerund. After seem, you need an infinitive. She seems to be. And after expect, you need an infinitive. I expect to receive. If you'd like to know more about which verbs take a gerund and which verbs take an infinitive, please have a look at lesson 31, where I do give you a list. So there's a list of verbs, and it's a rule. After these verbs, you always need a gerund. After these verbs, you always need an infinitive. Okay. The next lesson was a very nice lesson because we talked about the topic of music, which is something I think most of us can relate to. We have an interest in music in one way or another. We have a favourite band, a favourite singer. Perhaps we like to listen to the radio. Perhaps we like to go to music concerts. So we had a lot of discussion about music in lesson 32. To practice, I've given you 4 rows, but in each row there is an odd one out. So they're all instruments, but which instrument is different to the others in the row? So the first row we have guitar, piano, violin and harp. Row 2, flute, oboe, cello and clarinet. Trumpet, tuba, trombone and bassoon. And the last row, drums, keyboard, saxophone and xylophone. So for each row, see if you can identify which instrument is different and why. Okay, do you have your answers ready? Let's check together and see how you did. So in the first row, we have piano. The others are all stringed instruments. It's true that the piano does have strings, but they're inside, and it's not classed as a stringed instrument. In row 2, the odd one out is cello. The others are all woodwind. Cello is a stringed instrument. Row 3, trumpet, tuba and trombone are all brass, whereas bassoon is woodwind. And drums, keyboard, saxophone and xylophone, the odd one out here is saxophone, which is a woodwind instrument. The others all form part of percussion. Again, if you're not sure what any of these instruments are, it's probably a good idea to do an internet search and look for images. That's the easiest way for you to see what the instrument is. Okay, following our vocabulary lesson, we had a second look at the gerund and infinitive. And this time we isolated 4 key verbs that are very important because they can be used in either the gerund or the infinitive, but they change the meaning. So this was a very key lesson, and it was also a very challenging lesson. So it's not an easy topic. To review it, and remember this is a review, so if you want to have a look at the explanations for these, please have a look at lesson 33. To review this, I've given you pairs of sentences, and in each sentence, one is correct and one is incorrect. So for number 1, the verb is remember. So 1 and 2, we're using remember. I know I locked the car. I remember locking it. I know I locked the car. I remember to lock it. Our second pair uses try. I tried knocking on the door, but there was no answer. I tried to knock on the door, but there was no answer. 5 and 6 is reviewing like. I like having a health check once a year. I like to have a health check once a year. And 7 and 8 was reviewing stop. I stop running in the winter, the air is too cold. I stop to run in the winter, the air is too cold. So what you need to do for each pair is to identify which one is correct. And ideally, I'd like you to think why. Okay, again, I said it's quite challenging this, so don't worry if you found this a little bit difficult. But let's check our answers because maybe you've got them all right, which is great. So the correct answers are in green. I know I locked the car. I remember locking it. Number 3, I tried knocking on the door, but there was no answer. Number 6, I like to have a health check once a year. And number 7, I stop running in the winter, the air is too cold. These are the correct options. To understand why, please look at lesson 33 because I talk in a lot of detail and there's a lot more practice in there as well so that you can really understand what the difference is. Well done if you got those correct. If you didn't or if you'd like to know more, please have a look at lesson 33. Okay, after the challenges of gerund and infinitive, we had a very nice vocabulary lesson talking about sleep. Lots of discussion with this topic because it's something that affects absolutely everyone. And we also had a lot of nice vocabulary that we used as well. So I'm asking you, how many words can you think of for each category? Number 1, things you put on your bed. Number 2, things you do when you are sleepy or sleeping. Number 3, types of sleep. And number 4, sleep problems. Pause the slide and see how many words you can write down for each category. Okay, so there are lots of possibilities here, but the words I've noted down are the words that we looked at together in this lesson. So things you put on your bed: blanket, sheet, duvet. Note the pronunciation, duvet and pillow. Things you do when you are sleepy or sleeping: snore, hopefully not, dream, have nightmares, or yawn. Types of sleep: a lie-in, a snooze, a siesta, to oversleep and a nap. And sleep problems, we talked a lot about jet lag, keeping awake, and insomnia. So a lot of interesting vocabulary there. Okay, and then we reached another review lesson. So by lesson 35, you can recognise verbs that always take the gerund and verbs that always take the infinitive. You can describe different musical genres and describe your taste in music. We also had a pronunciation focus and we looked at words that the English language borrows from other languages. We looked at remember, try, like and stop, followed by the gerund and infinitive forms, and you can now understand how this changes meaning. You can use vocabulary connected to sleep. You can accurately use prepositions for time expressions, and you can discuss the impact of modern lifestyles on sleep. Wow, that's a lot in that list, isn't it? So if you have studied those lessons up to 35, that's really, really great. If you haven't and you're interested in any of those topics, then by all means go and look at the lesson. Okay, let's move on. Lesson 36 was a grammar-based lesson thinking about reporting verbs, and we started by focusing on say or tell. So nice and easy, 6 sentences, but do you need to use say or tell? And please put in the correct tense. So firstly, decide is it say or tell, and then look at the sentence, and at this level, I need you to put it in the correct tense, please. Let's check our answers. Number 1, he told a joke to break the ice. Number 2, I promise I'm telling you the truth. Number 3, the couple said goodbye at the station. Number 4, I don't know why she said that. Number 5, I told him to behave. And number 6, she said to me that she'd be here at 4 p.m. Well done if you got those correct. If you didn't, have a look at the lesson. Okay, we then moved on to a vocabulary lesson talking about a really relevant issue, which is social media. Either you love it, you hate it, maybe you're a bit indifferent to it, but it's something that we can't ignore. It's something that you'll come across in your personal life, your social life, maybe even your working life. So it's something that's very important to talk about. It's also a very popular topic for examiners. So anybody taking an exam, this is a topic you need to think about as well. One of the areas we looked at was acronyms, abbreviations. Let's review some of those together. So I've given you 6 that we talked about in lesson 37, but do you know what these popular acronyms actually mean? What do they stand for? Not just a random collection of letters, they do have a meaning. If you've studied lesson 37, hopefully you might remember some of them. Maybe they're things that you've come across when you're texting or emailing, or maybe you just want to have a guess. But in any case, pause the slide and see if you can correctly tell me what these acronyms actually mean. Let's have a look together then. So, BTW, by the way. FTF is face-to-face. IDK is I don't know. LOL, laughing out loud. TBH, to be honest. And YOLO, you only live once. Now, in lesson 37, we did practice using these in complete sentences. So we looked at how you would text or email and how you might incorporate these acronyms into a sentence. And remember, with new expressions, with vocabulary, it's so important to look at it in context, because then you'll understand how to use it in a natural way. The second of our grammar lessons in this section of the course, we looked at reporting verbs again, and we focused on direct and indirect speech. So have a look at the picture. This is Amanda. Can you complete what she told you about herself? I work in an office. She said she. I work long hours. She said her hours. I'm part of a large team. She said she. I hate my job. She said she. So all you need to do is to complete the second part. Imagine you're telling somebody else what Amanda told you. Okay, let's have a look together. She said she worked in an office. She said her hours were long. She said she was part of a large team. She said she hated her job. So you'll notice, which is what we looked at in this lesson, that the verb takes one step back when you're reporting. I work in an office. She said she worked in an office. I hate my job. She said she hated her job. But, and it is an important but, we did talk about how if the situation is still true, you can still use the same tense. However, if the situation has finished, you must take that step back. So an important point to consider there. Okay, the next vocabulary lesson, the topic was the news. We talked a lot about headlines and how headlines in English can be very difficult to understand. To help with this, we focused on some key nouns and key verbs, but we're going to review the nouns that are commonly used in newspaper headlines. So what I'm asking you to do here is to look at the noun on the left and match with a synonym, a word with a similar meaning on the right. So you just need to match the nouns put them into pairs. So we have a probe, a blaze, a plea, a bid, a clash, a poll, and a threat. Match with a risk, a request, a fire, an investigation, an attempt, a dispute, and a survey. So pause the slide and see if you can match. Okay, let's check the answers. So a probe is an investigation, a blaze is a fire, a plea is a request, a bid is an attempt, a clash is a dispute, a poll is a survey, and a threat is a risk. We talked, when we looked at this language, about how newspapers use words that are very emotive, very dynamic, have a big impact, and also practically are often much shorter because they have very limited space to fit the words in. So this is a very useful technique for interpreting headlines because they're very commonly used nouns. If you want to know more, have a look at lesson 39. And that brings us up to date. So let's look at the can-do statements up to lesson 40. So if you've studied 36, 37, 38 and 39, you can understand the difference between say and tell. You can use a range of verbs for reporting speech. You're better able to identify word stress. You can use verb and noun collocations connected to social media. You can discuss the impact of social media and understand some common abbreviations. You can recognize the form and use of direct and indirect speech and better understand news headlines because you can interpret commonly used nouns and verbs. So that brings us up to date to this review lesson. I hope you found this really useful. Remember, and I keep saying this, the best way to improve is to practice, practice, practice. So the more you use the language, the more practice activities you do, the more likely you are to be able to remember the word or expression and to be able to use it correctly, which is what we need to do at this level. So thank you for joining me for lesson 40. I will see you next time for a grammar-based lesson. Goodbye for now.